Today I'd like to tell you about my 10-year quest for relevance and how that's led to a surprising and maybe even controversial conclusion.
That's a younger Bill Gross unveiling his latest project at a TED conference on February 21st, 1998. Remember this date, computer freaks friends. It's going to matter a heck of a lot later on. You may know what a TED conference is now. It's the kind of thing your friends may name drop their attending. It's peak I made it for some people. But back then, TED was a group of misfits presenting their latest and craziest ideas. Kind of the perfect environment for Bill Gross. To cap off the conference on its last day, TED's founder, Richard Saul Wurman, had asked Bill to talk about search. Bill had been doing a lot of work on this topic and had plenty to say.
But on the web, since everybody wants to be at the top because the attention is so important, the web really is a marketplace for attention. All these sites vying for your attention, that's the valuable thing that you have to give. We had to come up with some other angle, and we just couldn't get anything like this to work for anything more than maybe even 1 million documents. So we really gave up. We actually were sort of in despair about 6 months ago, and we're going to abandon the project. And as we were abandoning this in one of our brainstorming sessions, we threw out another idea, which is a whole new way of doing this, which I think is going to be very controversial, but I do believe it really yields the most relevant results you can get. And it's the least fudgeable, the least fakeable, and that is to use the marketplace, to actually make an open market, like a stock market for attention, like a NASDAQ. And we made a prototype of this. It's called GoTo.com. And at this search engine, basically, it's an open stock market bid for position, where any website can put in a bid in cents that they would like to pay for a click-through when you type in that search term. And you can buy any search term, as many search terms as you want, and it's an open and public bidding process, so we actually put the price right next to every search result. In a certain way, it's a little bit like a Yellow Pages, sort of when you look up plumber in the Yellow Pages, and there's the full page ads first, and then the half page ads second, and then quarter page ads, and then the line listings. Now, I don't think it's the absolute theoretical best way to come up with relevancy, but I actually think it's better than any other algorithm we could come up with, and it's better and it's more scalable than any other human approach we could come up with, because we actually get millions of people bidding, and because there's money involved, the bidding is honest. In other words, you can bid for keywords and you can put keywords on your website, but it doesn't cost anything. And it was amazing how quickly just everything evens out.
What Bill was proposing was innovative, but among the remnants of academic purists in the tech space, this was controversial.
Oh, there were people in the audience who booed practically when they saw this.
Bill was telling us all about this TED Talk when we visited him at his Pasadena offices last spring. Here is how Richard Saul Wurman remembers Bill's presentation.
He presented an idea, but it didn't have sticky to that audience at that moment. At different moments, time is very important when you say something. Sometimes, for whatever reason, it just has sticky on.
The names you really know for search also presented at a TED conference a few years later.
And I watched the sticky. I watched when the Bobbsey twins, Sergey and Larry, they introduced Google there. They were definitely two college kids from Stanford.
Sergey Brin and Larry Page, or the Bobbsey twins, as Richard called them, would certainly get search right later. But at that point, Bill was the one floating the idea first.
There were skeptics because people thought it was practically immoral to bring money into search results, that search results somehow should be pure, and that having people bid was like this unfair or unethical kind of thing. And my response to that was, are you kidding me? Right now, there's an unethical game of cat and mouse going on with spammers. That's way worse. I'm being transparent with the bidding, and bidding is a more clean way of getting results than leaving it to randomness or editors to pick. This is actually more realistic and scalable.
Of course, at the time, that sounded crazy.
And of course, the world came around to that. It took some time, but the world fully came around to it. In fact, the world fully embraces that now and understands that search is everything. And why are you messing with this new medium, which should be free of commerce, and putting commerce into it? But of course, that was short-lived.
Commerce intertwined with relevance-based search is exactly what we have today. Each one of us uses it every day, only under the banner of Google. That's what we are going to get into in this episode. This is Computer Freaks from Inc.
My name is...
I'm Christine Hani Dare Bryan. Chapter 5, Crazy Bill.
We were on the break!
It's 1998.
And the Oscar goes to Titanic. I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
Chicago Bulls have won their 6th NBA championship.
The internet is hot.
MTV News.
The internet itself is definitely exploding.
It hit, and within like 2 years, it's become so powerful.
If you ain't on the information superhighway, baby, where is he?
People are dreaming up all of the ways they could use the internet. But remember, they still can't easily do things like search for items. There's still a lot of yellow pages lying around, and they're not just being used as booster seats at your grandparents' house. That's because it was still super hard to find something on the internet, regardless of the search engines that were cropping up. Bill was trying to fix this with his newest company, GoTo.com. Since he was running many companies through Idealab, Tom Solonil, along with some other new hires, were helping Bill think up ways to make search better.
The public search companies are AltaVista and Lycos and Excite and Yahoo, but all of them are having declining search quality. Why? Because now the internet was taking off. And now everybody realized if you had a website, search is the most important way to get people to come to your website. Search was like the yellow pages of the web. Search was the way you found something. And yet it was being spammed. People were coming up with all the tricks to trick the search engines into getting traffic to them. So it was just a spam game. And the search engines, this all happened so fast, they didn't have the mechanisms in place to stop the spammers. The spammers were outwitting the search engines. So search quality was going down really fast.
What he's talking about here is the fact that people were manipulating the system by doing things like putting a word in white text 100 times on their website so you couldn't see it. So irrelevant sites would come up all the time in searches.
So I was trying to figure out how could you make a search site that was not spammable like that? And that's when the aha moment came to me from my Yellow Pages experience.
Here we go again with the Yellow Pages.
Yellow Pages makes people pay more if you want a bigger ad. So what about if you make people pay more if they want to indicate their relevance? What about if you let people bid on the word car, and the higher they bid, the higher they'll show up? And by using money as the metric, that's not spammable. Because if you bid too high and you're not relevant, you'll go out of business because you'll be buying the wrong word, you'll be buying the wrong keyword. So that was a way to clean up search. And my insight was bidded keywords will be unspammable because you'll only choose relevant words.
Like Bill mentioned in the last episode, if you want your ad to result in more sales of things like stereo systems, you want a really targeted audience. It seems obvious now, but there were a lot of skeptics in 1998, and Bill would need more allies in the business community to make his case. Tim Cadogan, who is now CEO of GoFundMe, had a promising and arguably safe job at the consulting firm McKinsey. Nobody gave up jobs like that back then. They were golden tickets. But 1 year after Bill had given his TED Talk, Cadogan walked away from McKinsey to become GoTo.com's VP of Search and to persuade people to embrace Bill's vision. Tim found that even with his credentials, big companies did not trust Bill's plan. They thought what GoTo.com was doing was just too unseemly.
I'll set the context a little bit. So early days of the internet, you know this better than I do because your dad was involved in it. You've been, immersed in it. You've done the whole series. The internet was very idealistic, and it was about doing good, connecting people, and search was an important part of that. So the idea of bringing business into search and creating a competitive marketplace to present your business in response to a search was viewed as maybe even somewhat immoral, that this idea was just not really kosher. And so quite a lot of the bigger companies were reluctant to engage and certainly to even consider partnering with. I'll give you an example, like Yahoo early on just philosophically didn't agree with the model, right? And so for probably 3 years, like we couldn't get a meeting. Like it just was a non-starter. Don't want to talk to you guys. And this is true for so many new ideas, right? That, you know, when you bring a new idea, you bring a new way of doing business, it's rare that people are like, oh, that's a great idea. Let's just do it, right? It kind of runs up against the existing preconceptions and models that people have, and it's different and threatening and so on.
But Tim was still eager to take on these challenges because he thought there was something there.
It actually had all those kind of classic, you know, the classic archetype of an adventure is you have to, you know, if you go to the Greek stuff or, you know, any of these sort of the archetypes, you have to have, I think at the beginning it has to be very difficult. And then you have to have some kind of breakthrough. And early on, it was quite difficult because people thought that what we were doing was a really bad idea.
But Tim absolutely disagreed with that thinking. He had never seen anything as powerful and revealing as what search showed. It was a window into the minds of everyone on the internet.
I thought search was really, really interesting because fundamentally what search was and is people declaring what's on their mind, what they're interested in real time, explicitly. I'm trying to think of whether there was anything before that is even close, which is you've got millions of people who are saying, who are expressing, articulating, I'm interested in this right now. That's an amazing expression of interest. And almost like, I think we even called it back then, because it's a pure real-time feed of America's consciousness.
I can't emphasize enough how big a point this is. When a company sees what we are searching, they are seeing our deepest wishes, like a weekend in Paris, and our most immediate problems, like my kid swallowed a paperclip, what do I do? Tim thought there had to be a way to build on this window into America's consciousness.
I thought we had a really unique and compelling business model that would hook into that. So we took this expression of interest, people telling us more broadly, telling the search engines, I'm interested in this, I'm interested in it right now. And I'm telling you directly, it's not inferred, it's not implied, it is explicit. We've got a business model that is harnessing businesses to that in a way that hasn't been created before. So if it worked, the premise was you would enable businesses to grow because you enabled them to get attention through advertising and drive sales in an economically efficient way. Now that if it worked, it meant it would get to scale, but the sort of unit economics were, I'll only pay if I get something. So this was cost per click, right? Which a lot of these things sound so funny now because it's sort of so obvious, right, with hindsight. But at the time, most people didn't pay on a cost per click. You would pay in advance to advertise and then hope that you would get a return, which, as we saw later with the crash in 2001 and so on, didn't work very well. So this model was like, hey, you only pay if you get a customer to come to your website.
It seems so obvious now, but it was revelatory back then. And on top of that, GoTo.com enabled smaller businesses to get into the online advertising game. Jeffrey Brewer, a protege of Bill Gross from another company, joined GoTo.com in early January 1998. Within 2 weeks, he said Bill asked him to be CEO of his new company and tasked him to write the first business plan and demo. Brewer agreed. He felt that GoTo.com was offering a lot of overlooked small businesses the opportunity to expand that they just weren't getting from the tech giants.
This was the only place that small advertisers could actually get targeted leads for their businesses. The only place on the internet, because the only advertising vehicles that were open were sponsorships or banner ads that might be slightly targeted by the interest of the user based on the type of sites they appeared on. But the idea that you could actually target an ad to somebody who entered fly fishing or used books, that didn't exist on the internet. So we were the first persons to actually allow that level of micro-targeting, and the targeting was every set of terms that people search for. So there was no place else on the internet And once we developed a certain level of traffic to it, advertisers found us and started signing up by the tens of thousands, because these are small businesses who might only spend $100 or $200, $500 or $1,000. And they literally couldn't buy anything from Yahoo because they didn't sell anything at that price point. So, but we were able to serve many of these folks based on having much more inventory and conceiving the inventory as every search term.
For this new model, GoTo.com also created a design you may be familiar with.
The search engines and directories like Yahoo were just an ungodly mess. There's so much, they put all these display ads on the pages, so many links, and it was just so overwhelming to try and navigate it. It was a terrible interface that I think was just inherently cognitively stressful for people to navigate as they were trying to monetize it. And we, before Google, actually introduced our model of search, and our tagline was "Search is simple." And all we had was one box on the page, no advertisements on the front page, no other content, no news or other editorial. It was just a search box, and then you just got search results. We invented that. Obviously, that was Google's approach as well.
He's right. I am sure this reminds you of Google's search page. Google was born almost exactly the same time as GoTo.com. Instead of a seasoned serial entrepreneur like Bill Gross, Google was founded by the two Stanford students Richard mentioned before, named Sergey Brin and Larry Page. Bill recalls he first met Larry and Sergey at where else but a TED conference. But while Google's computer freaks from Stanford were still perfecting the technology behind their search engine, GoTo.com had shifted its focus to becoming profitable. By 1999, in that frothy first internet boom, GoTo.com went public. Shortly after, it changed its name to Overture. And that's when it started really making deals with bigger companies. Andre Berengian joined GoTo.com's business operations in 2000. This is what he remembers about the company back then.
Google became like, we want to have an owned and operated site that you land on and do a search. And GoTo had a little bit, or Overture had a little bit of that, but the idea was, let's become the engine that powers other people. And so that's what we did, is we powered a lot of other people. And so the idea was, put the widget on your site. You can be anybody. You could be a CNN, or you could be Jeeves, or you could be whoever. We'll power your paid searches. And so what happened then was, it was a bit of a wild west of like, let's do land grabs, let's get as many deals as possible, because that reach and that distribution ultimately allowed for some significant lift in revenue and monetization.
It's this business-to-business aspect of GoTo.com that seemed to be winning over previous skeptics.
For a very long time in internet years, the clear winner. We're growing, we had the most market share, we're growing really fast. And being the innovator in the space, that really helped. You're known as a creator of kind of the search space. Our product was out there earlier. The teams were out there selling the product earlier. So to publishers, not necessarily to the consumer, but to publishers and partners that were driving the traffic, we were definitely the biggest game in town. And so perceived very positively. Then as more competitors came in, of course, everyone's got a little different spin on how they do search. Then we could see competition in the market and ultimately the things that happen that comes with that. But I think, in at least my recollection of that, we had very positive perception in the marketplace.
So after those early boos at the TED conference and the skepticism that their approach to search was unseemly, GoTo.com started its ascent to the top of the tech sphere. They were securing deals with every big name in technology and media, from Yahoo to AOL. But kind of like EIT, why are the names GoTo.com and Overture not as famous as Google? Why is it that when we are searching for something, we don't GoTo.com it versus Google it? These are all questions we're going to answer after the break.
I was approached by headhunters because I was involved in internet business for many years through my previous company, Air Miles, now known as Avios, part of British Airways then. And I had the first airline seat booking website in Europe.
This is Nick Hines. Nick is a Brit who was an early internet enthusiast.
I was involved with Mastership Heath, BT's research center, which developed asynchronous digital subscriber loop, which is broadband, as you know today. Involved in that back in 92, which is before the internet, so before Tim Berners-Lee did the World Wide Web. In my industry, by 2000, I was a bit of a grandee already.
Basically, Nick is a big internet deal. Because of that, GoTo.com brought him in. It was January 2000. GoTo.com had gone public, changed its name to Overture, and had 90% of market share, with companies like Yahoo, AltaVista, Lycos, and Excite. They were powering search for a lot of people on the internet. So they brought Nick in to help them take their tiny Pasadena startup global.
So I was the first person outside of, not just outside of Pasadena, outside of America. I was in London. They wanted me to set up an international operation, but they had no money. So they said, we can give you $2 million. And that's the only investment I ever had. And then I took the business from literally my back bedroom with that $2 million and the tech platform. And we took it across 16 countries, created a new industry in 30 months. And we took it to Japan and Korea as a Asian business in the internet world. 16 countries in 30 months from a standing start. And we created the industry that people know today as the paid search industry.
Nick helped GoTo.com expand tremendously, but he still had to overcome his share of cultural barriers.
In Europe, you have a different perspective because obviously head office back in California. And so we were competing and fighting every day in a European and Asian context. You know, some things worked really well from California, some things really held us back. The apocryphal tale I give is when we were sent some servers over from California. Why we had to be sent from servers from California is another question, but they did arrive, and two blokes brought them. They arrived in January in socks, in shorts and a t-shirt, January, UK, London, with a bunch of servers. They ran on 110 volts with 2-pin plugs. Now, if you're a Brit, you're probably aware that wasn't going to go very far.
So anyone who has been to the UK or Europe knows that was a bad idea, and that you could burn your office down with plugging in the wrong voltage.
And it's an apocryphal tale of just how unprepared California was for the realities of the market outside of Pasadena.
Nick, with his sophisticated global vision, had a few darlings to kill if he wanted to help GoTo.com grow. Starting with, you guessed it, Bill Gross's beloved Yellow Pages approach to advertising. Nick had no patience for those small-time advertisers GoTo.com was going after. He had bigger and better-dressed plans.
Where they were at, their sales was run by a guy called Jay Galanetti, very nice man, sadly no longer with us. And he had a team of about 40 graduates sitting in a room, each with a copy of the Yellow Pages. And they were phoning up small mom and pop businesses saying, hey, how would you like to be the top of the Yahoo search results? And that's how they sold. And I pointed out to everybody that would listen that they would spend from now until the end of time building a business on that basis. So I said, right, what you need to sell to is the big spenders. The big spenders are large corporates. Outside of the domestic US market, those big corporates spend their money through agencies. What is your agency proposition? And GoTo at that point had never, ever spoken to an agency of any kind. So my sales director, who'd been my sales director of previous businesses, went to Saks Fifth Avenue in Pasadena bought a suit, got on a plane up to San Francisco, and took Jay Gallinetti with him, and did the first ever agency pitch for paid search. And then we took that and we developed the whole marketplace through the agencies and direct to large corporates. And we created an ambassador framework, all of which Google has copied to the letter. And the reason that they do is because I taught them how to do it.
But Nick was okay with Google copying what they were doing because at the time in 2000, GoTo.com and Google were the underdogs. They were the small players competing with companies like AOL, Yahoo, and MSN.
Google were helped because they were my enemy's enemy, and therefore they were my friend.
One of Nick's enemies' enemies was another Brit named Kate Burns, who came from the tabloid world. She joined Google in 2001, and like Nick, was trying to expand these search engine companies to the world. They both were London-based, lone satellite operations for Silicon Valley tech companies with big ambitions. That cemented a friendship between the two in what was then a very small community.
So back then, there was probably, I'm not going to say a handful, but maybe about 50 people in the sector that had big jobs, that had, leadership/pioneering roles. So, within that, there was a kind of camaraderie that we felt that was important as we were driving this forward. So, yeah, it would have been remiss of us not to build a healthy relationship. And I think there was an understanding that we're all in this together and everyone's success is a benefit to each other.
But Kate also struggled to bridge the many cultural divides between Silicon Valley and the rest of the world, starting from how she was recruited.
And then I got the fateful call early 2000, and this little startup called Google was really struggling to find anyone to run its European operations. And I was like, okay, I took a look at Google and I was like, well, this is boring. I was like, it looks like the Yellow Pages. And where are all the ads? So everything is white and minimal. It just looks so dull.
So she got on a plane and met with Google's founders, Larry Page and Sergey Brin, in Mountain View. It was an interview she would never forget, but one that she was not very enthusiastic about.
They grilled me for about 12 hours in this tiny room in a kind of sweating July day in California, and asked me the most tricky, random, bizarre questions. And I was just sitting there thinking, I don't even want this job. And they were both kind of eating hamburgers and these enormous sandwiches, and food was going everywhere. And I dressed up in a suit because I'm very un-California, right? So I should have turned up in chinos and a pair of sneakers, but I was wearing this bright pink suit and probably heels. And they probably thought I looked like something that they'd never seen before, tongue piercing. And anyway, Larry just took a lot of pleasure, and we laughed about it. He took a lot of pleasure just asking me really difficult maths questions. So he said, so Kate, how many ping pong balls are there? And I was like, what? And he's like, how many ping pong balls are there? I was like, where? And he was like, in the world. Tell me, how many ping pong balls are there? Like, what's the population of ping pong balls? And they both thought it was just hilariously funny. But, I put my brain into gear. I'm not very good at maths, by the way, but I seem to answer most of the questions correctly or nearly correctly. And they liked my way of thinking. And then they said, he was asking me a lot of trick questions like, how much would you charge Coca-Cola to take over the homepage of Google? And they loved my response. And I was like, well, why would you do that? Because that's premium retailing space. And that's the reason why I'm sitting here, is because I don't want you to do that. And if you did do that, I don't want the job. And they loved that response. So I kind of walked away with a job that I didn't want for a bunch of people that I had no idea. I just couldn't relate to because they were so on a different level. And then they kind of just gave me a laptop and told me to go and figure it out.
Figuring it out was not entirely easy to do, especially because Larry and Sergey expressed so many concerns to Kate about her expansion plans. Larry and Sergey both declined to speak to Computer Freaks for this podcast, but this is how Kate remembers their fears.
They were very honest with me in saying, we think this is a risk. The reason why we've hired you is you're the only person that we trust, but we're terrified that you're going to take our baby and build it into the redhead bastard child of Google. And so I was pretty much handcuffed, right, to just doing my job, not saying anything. didn't want to be local. They wanted this to be pretty much a US operation. And then eventually I flew a lot to the States, and I just kept on saying to them, guys, this is international, is going to be bigger than the US. And you need to recognize that. We'll reach a ceiling at some point where international will become really important to shareholders. And it did. And I kind of made my first annual target within 6 months with no support.
Despite the pushback and hesitation Kate received, she feels like Google was always going to take off more than any other tech company for one reason.
Google still is an engineering product business. And their order of doing things was build first. So build an exceptional, world-class, world-beating product. An example of that would be that they would have many hundreds of engineers just obsessing around the delivery of every single page and taking it down by milliseconds. So Google was quick. It was lightning fast and accurate. And going back to its competition, it was the opposite. I remember, we tapping your fingers, waiting for the homepage to download because of all the bloody ads that would be on it. So product first and obsession around being the best meant that they hired an army of the best brains and engineers in the world. And they were ruthless in that quest. And they would pay over the odds sometimes, right? Just to secure talent away from the competition, which was GoTo and Yahoo, and even AOL. I don't think there was the same amount of focus with their competition. And finally, last in order was monetization.
That commitment to product and the strong Google brand is what made Google succeed. Many people have said this over the years. And it's a path that was very different from the one that GoTo.com took. Stephanie Sarka was one of Bill's very first hires at GoTo.com in 1998. She ran product and marketing.
A lot of the people we were talking to, whoever they were, AOL or Lycos at the time, did not want us to have a brand because they were afraid that we were providing search for them to our affiliate partnerships only with the intention of grabbing their users. And we tried hard to convince people that we were always going to be search made simple, which is a tagline I created, and that we had no interest in becoming a portal. But those brands didn't necessarily believe that. So we were struggling, quite frankly, my understanding, to get some of these deals. So the decision was made, and I was very much on the other side of this conversation, to become only wholesale, to become only selling search into distribution partners, and to essentially not close our homepage. There was always a GoTo.com homepage and you could come search, but we stopped dedicating any kind of marketing resources to building the brand and driving traffic to our destination site. And that's kind of the kiss of death. Then we didn't have a brand and say, hey, you can say powered by GoTo or powered by Overture. We just didn't have that cachet, and we weren't getting that great margin because the deals with these partners were rev share and we were giving a lot to them, which was the right thing to do for the real estate. But then we needed a retail margin channel so that we could be feeding the beast and paying for those deals. So it became almost a vicious cycle because now all of a sudden Google has both and they're winning. They have this great retail brand. They have their own destination site. They're getting the big margins and they're beating us in the affiliate partnerships because they can pay more.
Plenty of people agreed with Stephanie. Here's Nick Hines.
And to come up with a stronger proposition to own more of the customer relations, the consumer relationship. And instead of that, we were stuck on a trajectory of distributing exclusively through other people's brands, whether it's T-Online or MSN or whatever. And that meant we were always vulnerable to the next deal struck by somebody. And Google invested in their paid search technology at a faster rate than we did because we were constrained by working capital. And inevitably, they overtook us.
So what was Bill Gross going to do but call up his friends at Google? As Bill remembers it, he offered to buy out Google. As John Battelle reported in his 2005 book about Google called The Search, at a 2001 TED conference, Bill suggested to Larry and Sergey that they merge. Bill said it's something he talked to his board about.
Probably in 2000, 2001 timeframe, we were across the street in the third floor boardroom of GoTo, now named Overture, because we renamed it Overture after we went public. And we were talking about acquiring Google, and they were desperate because they had no revenues and they were out of money. Google was desperate. And they felt that a combination was a great thing and that $200 million would be a very, very good outcome for them because they had no revenues and they were going to have to raise more money. And our board was discussing it, and they were just saying, I just don't see how we can explain to Wall Street that we would give up such a significant stake of our company for something with no revenues. And I remember arguing, but it's not about the revenues. It's about the relevance. It's about having relevant results. That's going to be important for the future. And they said, yeah, but we have a money mint. Our thing is a money mint right now. We don't need to worry about that. But I really felt that over time, having relevance for all searches, not just commerce searches. We were really winning in commerce search. They were really winning in knowledge search. But I knew that it was going to become important because I was using Google more and more for my knowledge searches. And I didn't want to be thinking about bifurcating my search and going to GoTo for shopping and going to Google for smarts. I wanted to go to one place that had them both by side. I even made a mock-up once of a search result that I called GoToGle. GoTo combined with Google, where I split the screen. I have a funny logo of GoToGle with a split of our logo and their logo, where I had the left half of the screen was GoTo and the right half of the screen was Google. And every search you did just gave you two columns, which was eventually what Google did, which is give you two-column search. It used to be, I don't know if you remember in the early days of Google, there were two columns. There was the Google results on the left and a thin column of paid results on the right. Now they integrated them and put them up on top because they found they could make more money by putting the sponsored results at the top. But at the beginning, they put them on the right. And that was GoToGle. That was that.
But Bill said his board never shared his vision.
We were outvoted like 6-3. And I was very frustrated. But we didn't think it was the end of the world. But I definitely thought combining with Google made complete and total sense because I felt like we have developed the best method of monetization and they have developed the best method of relevance. Those two belong together. I knew that then, and it's true now. I mean, obviously right now Google still does that, puts together the best relevance and the best method of monetization.
And it sounds like Google also never shared Bill's vision that they belong together. John Battelle also reported in his book that Larry and Sergey turned a cold shoulder to Bill's offer. That's because Google would never be associated with a company that mixed paid advertising with organic results. And by 2001, 3 years after Bill's first TED presentation, the Google founders were now royalty. David A. Weiss's book, The Google Story, also confirms that the Google founders could have hired GoTo.com to sell ads to display next to their search results. Or they could sell advertising themselves. And it wasn't a tough decision to do it on their own. I have spent months with my team trying to report out how serious a deal there was between GoTo.com and Google. I have poured through SEC filings and reached out to 15 former GoTo.com employees and 11 former board members who would have been in the meetings where this was discussed. Nobody will corroborate Bill's exact recollections about early bids for Google. I have repeatedly gone back to Bill and asked him to connect me with anyone from that time period, board members or venture capitalists, who can confirm this. Nobody agreed to speak. I also reached out to a Google spokeswoman for Larry and Sergey, and she did not respond. To be clear, nobody except Bill is confirming that these early offers took place. But I do think there is some truth to what Bill is remembering. Bill says that he was approached by a friend at Kleiner Perkins around the time of the tech crash, when Google was struggling, and he was asked to help the company out. And to be fair, Jeffrey Brewer, who was a director, said that these recollections aren't entirely far-fetched.
Bill did suggest we buy Google and I think he probably was the first person to become excited about that idea. Google wasn't very prominent at that time, and we had a lot of things that we were doing, growing the company fantastically in terms of employees, advertisers, revenue. And so operationally, that was really the focus, to validate the business and to meet our targets and serve the partners that we had signed up, those 3 search engines that now were driving our business. I guess I'd say it didn't seem like Google wasn't the force it would become and hadn't actually attracted the traffic that those other search engines had. And we had a lot of other operational priorities trying to exploit the gold mine that we had already found.
To be fair, everyone I spoke with who has worked with Bill talked about how he was always throwing out idea after idea after idea.
Buying Google would have been one of many ideas that Bill and I would have discussed over time for how we could take our opportunity and make it bigger. And I will give him credit. He did suggest it, but we also had a lot of other things that we were suggesting and discussing in those board meetings. It wasn't the singular focus of his advice.
But Bill says there was a third time he asked the board to make an offer for Google, and that time they agreed. Harry Chandler of the Los Angeles Times newspaper family and executive vice president at GoTo.com from 1998 through 2003 remembers that he was asked to travel to Google's headquarters and make an offer.
There was one particular board meeting where we talked about Google, what should we do? And I don't remember whose idea it was, probably Bill's, but he said, look, this looks like it's going to continue to grow fast. There were still, just a few banner ads on the site, so we could tell they were barely making any money, certainly not profitable. And so why don't we do sort of a Hail Mary? Why don't we send you up there, myself, Paul Ryan, who was our CTO, and 2 or 3 others, and talk to them, and we'll just make up this big round number, $1 billion, and see if they're interested in being acquired. So that was my mission. We went up to their office, and I think there were just 3 of them, Sergey, Larry, and Omid, who was the head of revenue. And we explained our back end, how valuable having these tens of thousands. By then, we probably had 50,000 advertisers, and how it was hard to get them, and how much we had invested to create a robust back end to manage all the listings, and how successful putting paid advertising into a search query result was. And they nodded and kind of kept close to their vest. And they gave me a Google t-shirt and said, nice to meet you. And 2 or 3 weeks later said, no, we're not going to take your offer.
But once again, nobody can corroborate on what date this offer was made. All they remember is that it was too little, too late for Google. Google was just too big for GoTo.com. And Google was now powerful enough to take GoTo.com's ideas. Remember earlier in the episode how Bill presented his vision for paid advertising on stage in February 1998 at the TED conference?
Importantly, we never filed for the patent on pay-per-click keyword advertising. We didn't know that it was valuable. So we just came out with that company. We launched it. That was my biggest lesson in patent law, that we should file for IP. And now we do that in all of our companies at the beginning. It was $1 trillion lesson, put it that way. That was very valuable. When we were getting ready to go public in March of 1999, the bankers said to us, where's your IP? We need to put that in the S1. And I said, we don't have any IP. And they said, well, can't you file the patent on pay-per-click advertising? And we said, sure, let's file it. And they looked, and it was March 3rd of 1999, and I had revealed that on stage.
Yes, the timing of that TED Talk became the Achilles heel for GoTo.com.
So more than a year had elapsed, and you only can file IP that you haven't revealed to the public within 1 year. So we missed it by like 5 days. So they said to us, well, you can't file for a patent on pay-per-click advertising. That's in the public domain now. But you can file for any IP that is behind the scenes that you haven't shown to the public. So they sat down with the team, I think Tom Zulnil and his team, and said, what are some things that you do in the ad system that's behind the scenes that might be relevant? And I think we filed 5 patents on how you type your bid into the system, how the sorting works, a bunch of things that are behind the scenes, things that are kind of not the main thing, but still subsidiary to the main idea. Those patents, Google eventually infringed upon, as well as the main idea, which was not an infringement because it was in the public domain. Google immediately copied the main idea, which is the big deal, but we didn't have a patent on that because we just didn't know. And again, when we came up with the idea for GoTo, it was so controversial and so, to me, obvious that filing a patent on it didn't even make sense. Of course, it was a valuable thing and we should have filed a patent on it.
So in 2002, GoTo.com sued Google for patent infringement. By the following year, Yahoo, which was one of the biggest users of GoTo.com, bought the company out for $1.63 billion. And the year after that, in 2004, Yahoo settled the suit with Google by accepting 2.7 million shares and Google stock. But even after making all of that money, the people who started GoTo.com were not entirely satisfied with the deal, especially Bill.
When we sold GoTo Overture to Yahoo for just about $2 billion, I didn't think we should do that either. I thought our company could grow to be worth much more. And I said to the board, this could be worth $100 billion. This really could be worth $100 billion, which that was an underestimate. It's worth $1 trillion. And they laughed at me. And they just said, Bill, you're a lunatic. You're dreaming. The market is the market. Look at the stock market. The stock market's telling us how much we're worth. How could you say we're worth $100 billion? And I listened to them. These were established people in business who called me a fool, and I thought maybe they were right. So yes, I was prescient, but I was a fool at the same time because of timing. Yes, there was a time gap between when it would be worth $100 billion. That would be another 8 years. But 8 years is a long time. They didn't want to wait 8 years to be worth 50 times more. They wanted to take that money now. So he's not going to listen to crazy Bill over here saying it's worth $100 billion. What if he's crazy and it's worth zero? I can't wait for that. So yes, I didn't have enough conviction to win, or I didn't know how to say it in a calm enough way to be persuasive. They thought I was crazy Bill.
I have to say, in my reporting, nobody has called Bill crazy to me, though several people I have interviewed have wondered about why Bill has not been even more successful, given his brilliant ideas. At first, I thought it was just a distorted Silicon Valley comment. If you're not Jeff Bezos, then you must be on a breadline and you must be crazy. Richard Saul Wurman, remember the creator of TED who invited Bill to speak at the talk in 1998, gave me the best sense of what these Silicon Valley people were suggesting.
Bill Gross is an enigma to me. And he's an enigma because he was a clever machine. He had rapid fire ideas. And I thought he would turn into a billionaire, or maybe what we thought about then, $100 million. They were just really good ideas, and he presented them with the innocence and excitement and laughter and mouse-like charm that Bezos had. And I thought I would have chosen him over Bezos to be very, very successful. He was trying to always hit it big on one of these things. Big, like big. I think he's made a living, but he's not big. And one of them, several of them, you know how many little things are out there. Some people hit them and then they get big because they glue together with something else. And it's a funny magic show. It's not logical. It is not logical.
But Stephanie Sarka doesn't describe Bill as crazy, and she certainly doesn't see him as ever wanting to be Jeff Bezos.
I've kept in touch loosely with Bill. I don't know a lot of the intricacies of his choices, but he does what he loves. And I love that about Bill. He may not have had the vision to be or mission to be Jeff Bezos. I think he is a creator and he's just he spews ideas and is constantly, he's an audacious thinker. He's always thinking 5-10 years ahead.
Stephanie gives Bill Gross a lot of credit for what he did create.
And obviously, it's bittersweet, right? Because, people always say, why didn't you become Google? Coulda, woulda, shoulda. But, Google wouldn't be Google without GoTo. That's another way to look at it. Because they may not have ever figured out a paid search model. Because what Bill had that nobody else had was audacity. I think we were too nice. We weren't audacious enough. We weren't cutthroat enough. We weren't just going to cut their legs off. He was audacious with the business model. And I'm not sure, one could argue, were we experienced enough? Do we have enough tech chops, marketing chops? Were we smart enough? Were we clever enough? A lot of things. At the end of the day, I don't know if we were mean enough and audacious enough. We didn't carry that audacious spirit.
But what happened to GoTo.com happens every day to tech companies. They sink or swim.
We completely beat the fucking door down. And Google came in and, was a beneficiary. And that's just how it works. And it kind of sucks. What they will never take away is that, Bill Gross had this idea, Bill and the 4 of us, and then the 10 of us, and then the 100 of us, and then the 1,000 of us. Like, we did something really important. We broke barriers. We changed the game. And that you can never take away from this team. And I'm never going to not be proud of that.
I think Stephanie was right. Bill was too damn nice. When I sat with Bill in his offices in Pasadena, he said what Google did to GoTo.com all worked out because he's friends now with Larry and Sergey. Larry even invited him to his wedding.
Sergey and Larry have thanked me profusely for inventing that and for helping them make their business. And in 2007, when Larry got married, he got married on Richard Branson's Island in the Bahamas. And he sent a Boeing business jet to pick up my wife and I at Van Nuys Airport to bring us to the island to celebrate with him at the wedding. So they were very, very thankful that we invented that, and they know that we had a big hand in inventing that system. And yes, would it have been better had we patented it? Possibly, but we're still very, very thrilled, and they were very, very grateful.
Okay, the mama bear in me wants to give Larry and Sergey my scariest mom warning face for not being kinder to Bill Gross. But I guess this is the world that our computer freaks have grown into. If my dad were still here, he would be shifting in his chair and grumbling about just how cutthroat his beloved technology world had become. But in my mind, when I think about Bill Gross, or who some tech people call Crazy Bill, and that time I spent with him in Pasadena, I wish he could escape the tech world he helped create. I assumed when he showed me his paintings that he had traveled to Saint-Remy to see where Van Gogh actually painted the Starry Night, that Bill paints over and over and over. My husband and I may not have the wealth of this new generation of computer freaks, but before we had kids, we got on a plane and we traveled to where Van Gogh captured those skies. That memory of that night sky has gotten us through so many moments in our marriage. Miscarriages, births, celebrations, and even the death of my dad. I wish Bill would leave his office and just stare up at that French sky that pulses with stars and life. It's something so much bigger than the battles he has faced in the tech world. It may just give him some peace. For now, Bill seems as upbeat as ever. And despite the fact that nobody except Jeffrey Brewer and Harry Chandler stand by his claims of trying to buy Google, he remains optimistic.
I feel so proud of that moment. I feel so proud and thanked by Google. And I feel like it was one thing in a career of many things I've worked on that I feel I saw the future and I was able to make it happen.
In our next episode, we're going to reflect on the stories of all of these computer freaks and the world they created. But that's for next time. Computer Freaks is created and hosted by myself, Christine Hani Dare-Bryan. Our executive producer and editor is Josh Christensen. Producers are Miriam Kiparawidze and Taka Zen. Production support from Blake Odom, Matt Toder, and Avery Miles. Music by James Jackman. Sound design and mixing by Nicholas Torres. Fact-checking by Mark Amundson. Special thanks to Stephanie Mehta, Mike Hoffman, and Michelle Legro. And I dedicate Computer Freaks Season 2 to my dad, Major Joseph Hani.